And I became enamored with a fellow named Buckminster Fuller, a 20th century kind of like pop icon in a way. And he wanted to popularize in the 1920s Einstein's ideas. He wanted to bring them to the masses. In 1990, after I graduated college in 89, the cover of Scientific America was a picture of the geodesic dome as a molecule, because Kroto and Smalley just discovered the third form, which we didn't know existed. It was diamond and graphite. They found the third form of carbon, which was shaped like I think it's called a truncated icosahedron. But Fuller had patented this shape as a building and talked about the importance of these buildings in nature. And so they named the molecule after him. So it's actually Buckminster Fullerene is actually the third form of carbon, which and I was being a fan of Buckminster Fuller. This was a huge deal that he was given so much. They named a molecule after him. Right. So I became inspired after college to go live in the woods for 2 years, read my Walden, on Walden Pond, Thoreau. And I lived in a year in the woods. And my goal was kind of like, before I became a normal adult and entered the working world, I wanted to kind of break things down one last big time and think about nature and construction and go back to like what Elon Musk would call first principles. Because I always suspected that the way we were taught things wasn't quite right, because it never jived with me. Even in engineering school, that there's got to be a better way to explain this stuff, to do this stuff. Untold story of history of the inventor of kindergarten, Frederick Froebel, who was an interesting cat, 1830s, Napoleonic era, and I'll give you an example of one of them right now with Lux Blox. But one of the gifts he had was he had these polyhedron that were on strings, and the kids would spin them. So here's an example of a pyramid, right? Here's a pyramid made out of Lux Blox, but when you spin these, because when you spin a pyramid, it whirls into a cone. It looks like a cone, right? Yes. And that what he wanted the kids to see was he wanted them to have a very intimate experience of Newton, because calculus is about finding the area under a curve by putting these little tiny rectangles in the curve, right? And keep approximating towards this infinity, which is an impossibility. Spheres, curves, they're all impossible. They're all infinites, right? Right. Any jeweler will tell you that if you want to make a sphere out of a piece of crystal, you just keep cutting facets into it.
Smoothness is an illusion.
Well, the idea of smoothness being an illusion leads to a lot of things, because we live in an illusory world where we live in a world of our perceptions. We're prejudiced towards our perceptions, right? But what we found out in the 20th century was with people like Einstein, that the old nursery rhyme was really kind of true. Life is but a dream. Row, row, row your boat. If you look at Frank Lloyd Wright's Prairie-style architecture, it came out of the Froebel kindergartens, building these blocks. The patterns of the blocks were Prairie-style architecture. Yeah. Buckminster Fuller famously, when he was 6 years old, went to one of these kindergartens. He was legally blind with a myopism a severe cross-eyed. He had no prescription for it. Wow. And so he was blind. The other kids were taking, one of the famous gifts was the peas and the toothpicks. And the kids, being kids, they'd make a square and a triangle, make a house, right? Or they'd take sticks and make a little stick person. And Fuller was going by touch. He started connecting triangles together, because triangles are the only true stable polygon. So he made a lattice structure that went to the ceiling, and later on, he actually patented it as an octet truss, and you see them over ATM machines and mobile stations. They're like the trusses over everything. But he patented something he discovered in kindergarten. So the Bauhaus movement in Germany claimed all of their basic revolution in art came out of the kindergartens they went to, these Froebel kindergartens. So my wife and I were like, what were they doing in these kindergartens? And why are they doing it now? And what can we do now? Since that was the 1830s and we're like almost the 2030s now, what can we do? What we learned in almost 200 years? Right. And we went back to Einstein and relativity and chaos and fractal geometry. Yeah. And we developed Lux Blox, which imitates the structural forms found in nature at the molecular and actually at the experiential level, but things you don't normally think about, like the shape of clouds, the shape of smoke, the shape of fluids. What Lux also gives you is a really crazy shape language that's right out of third year, differential equations or fluid dynamics. Yes. Where it's a very collegiate level spatial experience in play. It's also very correlated to nature. So you'll see these at the microscopic level. I'm a big fan of Ernst Haeckel. Ernst Haeckel was a kind of a frustrated artist in the 1800s who didn't know what to do with his life. He went down to Naples, Italy, and he had one of those early viewers, and he was looking like a microscope. He was looking at little crustaceous kind of diatoms and protists. And he started drawing them, and he discovered this whole realm of beauty at the microscopic level. He discovered his life. And when the Challenger came back from its great journey around the world, this big naturalistic journey, the HMS Challenger, they had all this stuff at Oxford. They didn't know what to do with it, all these samples. They said, well, just give Haeckel the job of going through all these algae samples and making drawings of them all. He cataloged almost 5,000 species that he got to name of these things. He did drawings and paintings, and they all look like this. I mean, they all look like this. They all look like Lux Blox. So when you get to the very small level of nature, things get highly symmetrical and highly geometric. So that's the great thing about Lux Blox is you kids can experience that level of nature, which is the majority of what's going on. We live between infinities as humans, right? There's the stars out there, and there's the molecules and atoms that we can't see. And we can barely see either one of them, but that's mostly what's going on. And Lux kind of exposes kids to that reality, which we think is really cool. I'm showing you what a building wants to do. So when you put Lux together, you'll make an unstable structure that wiggles and squishes. Any carpenter will tell you if you make a building out of just 2x4s and don't put any diagonals or any plywood on it, the 2x4s, those parallelograms, have no structure really, just the nails holding them in. They'll gyro and spin. And an architect in California might want some of that. You don't want the energy to transfer through the structure, but the kids will discover these deep architectural concepts just through play. Fuller always talked about pattern integrity. One of our most famous toys is our flexors. They create these kinematic linkage systems, but it shows you a mechanical reduction of squish. We think of squish as like, we think of pillows, they squish, right? But we can't tune into the little machinations going on at the microscopic level that are allowing those little cells of those, whatever kind of material they're using to squish down. But this shows you what is physically happening, and your brain's like, what the heck? I'm experiencing a visualization of squish, but I'm also feeling squish. And it makes your brain, it's a very satisfying experience. So I had this word called epiphany, and it comes from the Catholic tradition, the epiphanal experience. Usually it's a spiritual thing, but an epiphany is like so many of my heroes in life, like Einstein and stuff, they go on these walks or play a violin, and they said that their great insights came in these giant leaps, these flashes of insight. And what I'm finding with Lux Blox is it's kind of, I like to think of it as a tool that provides very fertile ground for epiphanal experience. Well, if kids don't experience going into the forest by a pond or a creek and putting their hand into a pond and stirring up the mud and picking up a snail, all those things I think are hugely formative for kids. They crystallize in their brain. They remember the rest of their lives. Why is that? Because nature does have this spatial richness to it, this texture that you're talking about, kinesthetic learning and learning through fidgets. Nature is the ultimate fidget, of course. I can't even, but what Lux does is it takes nature and reduces it to a plaything that shows these first principles. And we were a big Lego family, and we thought deeply about what Lego is. And Lego is basically a 10,000-year-old technology of brick art. And it's a high form of brick art. But Lego gives you a brick facsimile of everything. And nature makes a brick facsimile of virtually nothing. So nature's not working in that paradigm. We could look at all of our life as living on these like ruins, right, of the greatness of past civilizations. We all live in a ruin, right? And my wife and I are trying to create a new technology that honors those ruins, but says, okay, but you can make that Roman viaduct, vibrate and go into a wave and squish up and down and become more like Dr. Seuss, and you can see like a new kind of realm of nature in the potential of structure. Well, I come from education. I taught in Chicago public schools and then down here in Galesburg and had my own art school. And I dug deep into educational history and like how they did it and what were some interesting times in history. The Renaissance is a very interesting time because they lost Michelangelo, Donatello, and Leonardo, the three turtles, all like within 50 years of each other, right? Carracci family were very concerned about the loss of that treasure because they lost these three geniuses. And the Germans and the Dutch and the Spanish and the French were hot on the heels of Italian artists around Europe. Like, how do we make like an educational movement? The Italians invented this way of teaching drawing that I used in inner city Chicago. I found this book by Fioletti, and it was like how to draw human anatomy and all these beautiful designs. If you just had basic handwriting strokes, you can build a whole toolbox of you could fool so many people by learning these little algorithms, these little rules like long division.
Functions.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like coding. So I was like, okay, there's a way to code education to at least get kids to a level where they feel very confident, and then they can get into more of an epiphanal level of being creative. I remember one time my dad's in his Mark IV out, and he's in there and he's upset. And I hardly ever see my dad upset. He's like crying. He's really upset. I goes, what's wrong? What's wrong? He goes, you see this watch here? Yeah, I said, yeah. He goes, my best friend gave me this watch. And I said, oh, really? He goes, yeah, he was killed today. I said, oh my God. He goes, my gold Paquette that I wear sometimes? The guy who killed him gave me that watch. So I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
I
better get my chores done.
One day my dad made the mistake of asking him, Sam, you think I could drive for you? Sam Giancana said to my dad, he goes, this is back in the 50s, right? He said, what are you, an asshole? Do you see my toolbox? We don't have toolboxes.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you go and build like one of those nursing homes? That's the future, one of those old people homes. So I grew up, every house in my block was built by my dad. Like my whole neighborhood was built by my dad. Behind our house was a 72-bed nursing home called Oak Ridge Convalescent Home. The street was Sarah Lane. My dad named the streets. I mean, the world I was born into is this world where my dad became because of Sam Giancana, my dad became an entrepreneur, carpenter, right? And my mom was the administrator of the home. We called it the home. The home was the nursing home, not our house. It was the home.
Wow.
And so, so that my normal, I tell people something like one thing you learn when you're older is, you learn that what you thought was normal was only normal for you. And it might be actually kind of extraordinary. I developed early on a sense that we really weren't so smart. That what people were just assuming was the way to think about the world, I was suspect of, okay? And it came down to me like having heroes like Einstein, people who were questioning like, you think space and time and matter are set. But like I showed you the Enterprise because when I grew up as a kid, I'm sitting with my mom watching some of the original episodes. If you got put in a brig in the Enterprise, there wasn't a door, right? What was there?
It was like a force.
You were like a mime.
Yes.
Don't touch the force field, right? Or if you got attacked, you wouldn't have, thick iron hull. You'd have shields. Right?
Yeah.
And we find out now that actually there is the idea of thingness of the material world is actually just made up.
Yeah.
It's built in a prejudice that we are tuned in to see certain things as opaque, right? We know now from our scientific learning that there are molecules, high energy particles that go right through things all the time that don't even know they're there, that the relative proximity of an atom's nucleus and electron are like the Earth and the sun, that there's this vastness of empty space. Mm-hmm. So what makes something a thing is what Fuller would call a patterned integrity. Okay. It's more of a metaphysical truth than it is a concrete physical truth.
And we think playing with Lux Blox is kind of like a tuner to tune kids into these pattern integrities.
Nature has a prodigious level of creativity because it makes these, like for instance, cells make these membranes, right? And they could just form into sticks and form like nanotubes, right? Or they could make tetrahedrons, or they can make same material, or they can make balls, So what our blocks did,
I've also seen it, and Mike, I've seen it used on some videos, even to demonstrate computer coding.
Coding it's algorithmic. So, and that's what I was studying in Maine. I was trying to find an algorithm. Like an algorithm is just a process, like long division. It's like a process to get you from here to there. If you just do these steps, you will get input out here, output there. It'll be what you want, like a coder would want to do.
Correct.
This structure is regular because it's basically just a code. And when a kid's playing with it, he'll make the ball, then he'll make the things coming out of the nodes of the ball, and he'll figure out, oh, I did this. But then the kid will know, well, those nodes, those are 19 nodes in icosahedron, the same structures as that COVID uses, by the way. The viruses use icosahedral structures. He doesn't have to know what an icosahedron is. He doesn't know about Plato and Archimedes. He doesn't have to know about geometry. All the kid knows is he sees a pattern. His brain has just registered a pattern, and it's a regular pattern. And then he clicks and he goes, and so he's coding. It's a natural hands-on coding process. It's non-digital. We say we're high tech, non-digital, or non-digital high tech.
Exactly right.